Mursky. I'm participating from my home here in Ann Arbor, and as chair of the Energy Commission, I'm calling this meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. Welcome to the July 13th, 2021 electronic meeting of the Energy Commission. This virtual meeting is to affect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We'll conduct this meeting similar to in-person meetings. Commissioners, please remain on camera just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Also mute your microphone and not speaking. Public comments will be via telephone only. So I'm going to repeat this, but I'll say it a couple times then now. To speak during any time of the public comment opportunities, please call into one of the following toll-free numbers: 888-788.
Recording in progress.
0099 or 877-853-5247. Enter the meeting ID, which is 913-5783-4502. And these numbers, by the way, remain the same throughout the year. And this information, along with 2 local dial-in numbers, is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city's website, which is called Legistar or the city calendar, on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16 or AT&T channel 99, and online at att.a2gov.org/watch-CTN. Missy, could you kick us off by reading the land acknowledgement?
I would be delighted to. Thank you. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Could you also lead us through the roll call?
I would be so delighted to do that. Yeah, okay. Commissioner Hookham, and can you please state where the county you're calling from? Commissioner Hookham.
Yeah, Chuck Hookham, reporting from my Ann Arbor office. Good evening.
Commissioner McComber, just make sure no one's in the waiting room. Oh, she's in the waiting room. Okay, we'll circle back to her in just a second. Commissioner Klebe, present. Commissioner Levin. Okay. Chair Mursky.
Present.
Co-chair Colvin Garcia.
Present, joining you from Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Radina.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner McCoy.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner George.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Kerber.
Here, Auburn, Washington, on vacation.
Thank you. Commissioner McComber. Here we know.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Great. You have a quorum, Chair.
Great. And as I said, I'm participating also from Ann Arbor. So first point on the agenda is the approval of the last meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to approve those, and then any discussion, or second and any discussion?
So moved.
A second.
Go ahead. Eric, Councilmember Briggs, do you have any comment, or just was that a second?
Well, I just wanted to, it may just been me. I just didn't see them. Maybe they're attached to the Legistar agenda. Perhaps if others have been able to read through them, that's great.
So let me double check, but they are on the entry for the last month. Let's see, make sure.
My apologies then.
So the minutes are posted on Legistar on the last month. And yeah, they're posted and they're there. They're very, very brief minutes. There's not a whole lot of content, frankly. So so we have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The minutes are approved. So next point on the agenda is public input. And this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. As I mentioned before, if you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter the meeting ID 913-5783-4502. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand, quote unquote, one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand, indicate your desire to speak by pressing *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated message or announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet place and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. And then finally, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. So we'll wait 30 seconds or so. Do we have anyone already?
We do, yeah. Caller ending in 836.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
This is Ron Suarez, a former member of Ann Arbor City Council. I'm calling to express support for the group Ann Arbor for Public Power, who is calling for a feasibility study to investigate public power in Ann Arbor. I also have the beginnings of a website at annarbormicrogrid.com, and I'm concerned that in the 820 plan, the 138-page document, the word microgrid only appears 2 times, and once on page 130 and once on page 136. On page 130, it says create microgrids. And when I've asked about microgrids, I've not been able to get any response. And it looks like no one is taking this seriously. Climate change is a wicked problem that's going to require systemic change for us to deal with. And we need to at least be entertaining the possibility of talking about how public power would work. Coincidentally, this morning I heard a podcast, The Intercept with Ryan Grimm, interviewing Dennis Kucinich. Dennis Kucinich talking about when he was mayor of Cleveland and the struggles that he faced with public power in Cleveland. Again, I highly recommend Google The Intercept, Ryan Grimm, Dennis Kucinich, and you can see all about electric power and political power. And I think it would help us to think about alternatives that we need to consider rather than just doing incremental changes, relying on major gifts to DTE. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't necessarily respond to all callers, but I just wanted to mention that we will be having a presentation about the status of the development Viridian at County Park. And there will be a microgrid there on a pilot basis. And there's also, I think people know that there's been some legislation that has been introduced to permit microgrids at the state. Yeah, finally, by the way, I read the interview that you talked about. And if anybody else, it's called The Division of Light and Power is the name of the book that Kucinich wrote. And it's definitely worth reading. So thank you for your comments. Missy, do we have other people?
Yeah, caller ending in 152.
You are still muted. There we go.
Hello, this is Jeff Irwin. I'm a resident of Ann Arbor on the southeast side, very close to that Viridian development you just mentioned on Bellwood over here. I also happen to represent the community in the state Senate, and I'm here because I'm here because I'm a supporter of the 820 plan. I want to see it be successful. And when I look around the state and the nation, I see that areas that have municipal authorities tend to have greener and cheaper power. And so I'm interested in whether or not that's an option or not, and what the cost benefit analysis might show on that kind of plan here in Ann Arbor. And so I'm particularly interested to be here today to hear the legal analysis. Otherwise, I just feel the obligation to add, based on the previous comment, that I'm a strong supporter of the microgrid legislation in Lansing, and also trying to promote clean energy legislation on a variety of fronts there. And I'd be happy to talk to the commission at any time about any of that. Thank you.
Thank you for calling in, and thanks for representing us.
Caller ending in 820. Oops, sorry.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Bianco. I am a resident on the north side of Ann Arbor, and I'm also one of the co-chairs for the local chapter of Democratic Socialists of America. I'm calling today to speak in support of the aforementioned Ann Arbor for Public Power campaign, and specifically the feasibility study. I think for our organization and for me as a resident as well, I think it's a no-brainer to bring our energy utility into public democratic ownership. I think it will lead to, the data we have shows that it will lead to better outcomes for consumers, and will also just be a more democratic and efficient entity as well. So I just wanted to speak in support of recommending a feasibility study. I think it is more than worth it to look into all the aspects of what it would take to do this. And I think with climate change across the globe, many recent kind of incidents of extreme weather events in our country and across the globe as well, point to the fact that we need to take bold and progressive action immediately to do everything we can to stem the effects of climate change. And I think we're doing a lot of things in Ann Arbor, but I think a public utility, Ann Arbor for Public Power, will go a long way towards advancing those goals. So I think a feasibility study should be pursued. We should look into all the aspects of that. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thanks for your time. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Caller ending in 455.
Hello, my name is Lisa. Last name is Petrell. I'm speaking tonight as a citizen and a resident of Ward 5. I'm asking the commissioners to approve the money for the DER feasibility study that Ann Arbor Public Power is recommending. DER, Distributed Energy Resources, is becoming the industry term for municipal systems, micro, nano systems. I recommend also that you read Gretchen Bakkes' book, Bakkes, The Grid. The points and summations Bakke makes at a national level are already being mirrored at the state governance level. One fact is that DERs are the foundation for the grid in the future. As a member of Washtenaw 350, I have joined the Governor's Council on Climate Solutions. I'm in the Energy Production, Transmission, Distribution, and Storage Work Group. We have concluded phase 1, where various utilities, private, public, co-op, and municipals have presented since March of this year. And DERs, the takeaway is that nearly all parties agree, even our big public utilities, when challenged during Q&A, agree that DERs are the future, and it will be the system that knits together all the micro, nanos, campus, neighborhood, municipal, and larger systems across the state. The work that Ann Arbor Public Power is doing to research, establishing again a DER in Ann Arbor should be embraced by the city and all departments without interference, which could curtail findings or slow progress. In fact, the city should create synergy by funding the feasibility study that has been discussed in past meetings, and that needs to move forward. A set of bipartisan bills introduced into the Michigan legislature, 4715 and 4716, will ensure that DERs can move forward at a state level. There is energy at a state level to move forward with DERs. There was local citizen effort to move forward with DERs. There is a common understanding nationwide that DERs are the way forward. There is no benefit for Ann Arbor to act to the contrary. In the spirit of measure twice, cut once, spend the money for the study, or be redesigning in the
20
future and
seconds.
flushing all the wasted staff man hours down the drain. Thank you.
And thank you. Do we have anyone else in the queue?
We don't, Chair Mirsky.
I wanted to mention, and I just looked for it but couldn't find it. We received an email from someone who was unable to call in and asked that the comments be read into the record. I don't know, couldn't find the email. I don't know, I don't recall who else was copied, I'm sorry. But what I will do is I will forward the email to all commissioners.
I think we already did.
We did, okay.
I believe we did. And for utility, we're working with the clerk's office to get e-comment as well set up for the commission. So folks who can't join can submit comments. It just wasn't possible to get it on for today's meeting. So in the future, we'll have it.
Okay, great, great. Good, has anybody else gotten in the queue then, Missy, or are we ready to move on to the rest of the agenda?
No one else in the queue? You're ready.
Okay, so the next point on the agenda is Energy Commission bylaws. And Missy, why don't I let you introduce the subject because it actually stems from correspondence between you and the attorney's office. It seems that the minutes that we've discussed, or the bylaws, I should say, haven't been approved, or there's no record of approval. So I'll let Missy take it from there.
Yeah. So we were doing some cleanup on the bylaws, trying to find the most updated version to post on the website. And what we uncovered is that the body as a whole hasn't actually adopted the revised bylaws. We made a lot of recommendations on the revisions and we worked through that process, but then we never brought it back for a formal vote and have moved forward on the youth commissioner aspects. But for cleanup purposes, we do have to, as a body, formally adopt our bylaws, and then they'll go to council for formal approval. And at that point, we'll have our revised bylaws that we had discussed it, I think, before I kind of sat in on the commission. So it's a while ago this discussion has happened. So we're doing a little cleanup here.
Missy, is the intent then that we go through the bylaws and the changes? There's a link in the agenda.
I'm going to leave that to the will of the body, Chair Mirsky. I know nothing has changed since when the group discussed it, but it may not feel fresh. So I'm not sure. The will of the body, whatever feels right.
So for everybody's information, you all recall that we did make and discuss a couple of changes to the bylaws, one of which was the addition of youth commissioners. Indeed, we've actually added those, but apparently, as was indicated, those bylaws were not officially approved. So we are doing the cleanup that Missy talked about. I see Chuck has his hand raised. Go ahead, Chuck, you're recognized.
Thanks. Missy, if you look at item 3 in that write-up, you'll see that it references our climate change plan as well as the sustainability framework. Are those 2 documents still existing, or are they sunsetted now, replaced by 820 and work moving forward? I guess I just didn't want to reference something that's already out of date, and maybe we could make a simple change.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the sustainability framework definitely still exists, but the climate action plan has been replaced with 820. But I don't think it's false to say it's a climate action plan. We just call it 820. So we could either name it or leave it as is in case a next generation comes around and it's not called 820, or it's 820 2.0 or along those lines. Good. Thank you for the observation.
Yep. Thank you.
I'm not looking at it right now. Is it in capital letters or is it in small case? If it's in capital, then it's sort of a proper noun. If it's in small case, then we can just say that it's whatever the current iteration is.
Capital.
It is capital. So maybe we should change it to 820, or maybe we should just refer to it as the current climate action plan. What's your recommendation?
Was that directed at me, Chair Mercy?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Let me really quickly. What if we just say review and advise on the city's most up-to-date climate action plan?
Perfect.
All right, I'll take that down as a comment.
Does anybody else have any comments? If not, can we get a motion to approve the bylaws as previously discussed and as posted? We have a motion from Commissioner Clevey. We have a second from someone, and second from Commissioner McComber. Thank you. Any discussion other than what we just discussed? It looks that we don't have any, so can we take a vote? All in favor of adopting the bylaws, please raise your hand or say yes. Anyone opposed? No one opposed. We did clean up. Very good. Thank you, everybody. So next on the agenda is proposed Ann Arbor for Public Power, I should say, resolution on municipalization. We're going to do a first reading of that, as well as have a presentation before that of some PowerPoint slides giving us some additional background information. We already discussed the topic once before, but there's some new insights. And Missy, I believe we're going to turn over presenting privileges to Roshan and Chris, and I can't remember in which order.
Yeah, and Roshan, I know you guys are just popping in here. Roshan, should I make you the presenter?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. All right, should be good.
So I know that we sent you the slides. Did you just want me to do it myself, or?
It's up to you. If you'd like, I did merge them, so I'm happy to do that. Would that be better for you? And give me 1 second, I can pull them up.
Yeah, it might actually be better for me, just because I have them as 2 separate documents.
Yeah, you got it. And I'm confident that I messed up the last slide, so don't hate me too much.
No worries, thank you.
You just find it really quick. Okay. All right, you all are gonna know my secret that I don't know how to use PDFs for presentation mode. Let's see.
If I do either, to be honest.
No, it's here. I just saw it all. It's just not loading because city computers are delightful. All right, hold on. Bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to reload it and see if that helps a little bit. Thank you all for your patience.
Rashawn or Chris, do you want to use this time for any comments, or Ember, about the resolution, or do we just wait for Missy?
Let's try it.
Okay. The slides are a good introduction.
Okay,
There we go.
can you see it? This is the kick here. All right, is that visible for folk?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right, Rashawn, just tell me when.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I want to start by thanking Chair Mirsky and the Energy Commission for allowing us the time to speak today, and for the continued dialogue we've had over these past few months. Next slide. Just to give a little bit of context for those who might be watching the stream and don't know about our group, my name is Roshan Krishnan. I'm a member of a community organization called Arbor for Public Power. Next slide. We are a coalition of local residents and organizations. We have representation from Sunrise, the Democratic Socialists of America, Indivisible, U of M's Climate Action Movement, Washington Out 350, Ann Arbor Beyond Bernie, and others. And so our goal is a green and publicly owned energy future. We're committed to what we call the 4 Ds of energy democracy. That is, we seek to democratize, decommodify, decarbonize, and decolonize our energy systems. Next slide, please. And so the problem we're facing is, of course, that DTE isn't transitioning off of fossil fuels or onto renewables fast enough. I'm not going to belabor this because we've covered it a lot before, but just suffice to say that their current energy mix is very coal and fossil fuel heavy. They're still actively investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, and their net zero deadlines are late enough that they might as well not even be there. If we move to the next slide. We know that there are a number of different approaches that we can take to try to speed up a transition to renewables and to pursue energy justice. There are a lot of groups working on community choice aggregation at the state level. We've had some conversations about a sustainable energy utility to help with distributed energy proliferation and efficiency. And of course, we believe that a municipal electric utility could be a powerful tool for equitable decarbonization. And what's clear is we need to do this fast, so we should be open to any approach possible. I think I speak for all of us with ACP2 when I say I'd love to see CCA happen. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to a sustainable energy utility, but I think our goal here as community members together is to make sure that a municipal utility, that public power, gets a fair shake, that we seriously investigate what it could do for just decarbonization in Ann Arbor. Next slide, please. So with that, we have some clear benefits and also some open questions about how a municipal electric utility would work for Ann Arbor. Next slide, please. The benefits, again, are things we've talked about with you all previously, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. But we think that a municipal utility could be transformative for reliability, for affordability, for energy democracy and public accountability, all while pumping revenue into the community and shepherding a rapid community-controlled transition to clean energy. Next slide, please. So what we do need to know in order to ensure a municipal utility makes sense for Ann Arbor mostly has to do with cost. We need to know how much it would cost to establish a municipal utility, how much revenue it would generate, how that would compare to our other options, things of that nature. So on our next slide here, those questions are obviously crucial ones, and that's why we think a feasibility study is the path forward. Next slide, please. So just in short, what a feasibility study is a rigorous, realistic, forward-looking, and professional assessment of the net benefits of establishing a municipal electric utility. Typically, you'll find that these are conducted by professional engineering firms. Next slide. A feasibility study would look into a number of different things. It would project Ann Arbor's future residential and commercial electricity usage. It would project DTE's future revenues if we were to keep them as our energy provider. It would estimate various different costs, like the cost of acquiring DTE's infrastructure, project costs for power supply, operations and maintenance, and it would also identify financing sources for startup costs. So basically, in gathering all that information together, it would allow us to make a direct comparison to the investor-owned utility model, aka DTE, what we have now, and determine feasibility. So in other words, feasibility would be, what is the ability of the municipal utility after costs and debt service to supply reliable power at lower rates than DTE while also providing a revenue stream for the city. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of cost, our best estimate would be around $120,000. This is based on costs for other feasibility studies conducted across the country. We have examples from small towns like Decorah, Iowa, some mid-sized towns like Pueblo, Colorado, all the way up to huge cities like Chicago. And really, we think this is a small price to pay in order to take a serious look at an option that could be of significant benefit to Ann Arbor's energy future. Next slide, please. So I'm going to close by emphasizing that we're not asking the Energy Commission to commit to supporting a municipal utility. We are asking you to help us gather information to make the best decision for Ann Arbor. Currently, we don't see a clear path to implementing A20 Strategy 1 of powering our grid with 100% renewables. And as we've seen over the past month or so, from the flooding in Detroit to the heat waves across the American West, climate change is here. We have to take an honest look at all of our options and make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned in terms of things that can get us off of fossil fuels as fast as possible while protecting and improving the quality of life of our most vulnerable communities and strengthening public accountability and participation. So we believe that our resolution to recommend that the City Council fund a feasibility study is consistent with this approach in ensuring that we seriously consider a municipal utility. Ultimately, we know that a municipal utility is a legal option. It's one that we can pursue immediately. It brings power into the hands of the people, if you'll pardon the pun, and it's an option that could help us get to the 100% clean energy that we all know we need, while reducing energy burden on residents and generating revenue for a city. So we think it's worth really taking a serious look at that through a feasibility study. Next slide, please. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Chris Bisdock of Olson, Bisdock & Howard, who will provide more of the legal context around what this would look like. Chris leads the Energy and Climate Practice Group at Olson, Bisdock & Howard. He also served as an elected city commissioner and the mayor of Traverse City, and on the board of that city's municipal electric utility, Traverse City Light and Powered. So take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Roshan, and thanks to the Energy Commission for having me as a guest. And as a good guest, I will try not to overstay my welcome. I have just a couple of slides to share with you. We shared a fairly extensive report that hopefully you've received, which is partly a legal roadmap for the steps that would be involved in municipalization, and also some comments on the legality of doing so, either becoming the sole provider of electric service in Ann Arbor through an eminent domain situation, or as a parallel utility providing service in Ann Arbor in competition with DT Electric. Missy, would you mind moving to the next slide, which was merely introductory, so we'll move on to the next one after that. Our conclusions, which we can talk about in any level of detail that the Commission wishes, is that cities are authorized by both the Michigan Constitution and the Home Rule Cities Act to establish their own municipal electric companies. There are some votes and some steps which are outlined in our report to do that. Cities have two primary options, as I mentioned. One is to acquire the incumbent investor-owned utility by eminent domain, or to form their own utility to operate alongside the IOU. DTE has a permanent franchise in the city of Ann Arbor, as you all know, under the Foot Act, the old statute that precedes a couple iterations ago of the Michigan Constitution. And so they have a contractual right to continue that franchise, but it's not an exclusive franchise. The city, within the city limits, could operate its own electric company, and could also acquire that franchise through eminent domain. Could I have the next slide? We provided in the report a roadmap which begins with the feasibility study that Roshan mentioned, valuation, looking at the various options, whether it's purchase or condemnation, or whether it is operating in parallel. Could I go to the next slide? The financing alternatives for that project, as well as the obtaining of a franchise from the city for that activity. All of the details of this process and these steps are in our report. Our assessment of your city charter is that your city charter is already a fair way along in terms of its compatibility with establishing a muni. You would still need to have the votes that are outlined in the report, but there is a lot that's in your charter already that's compatible with engaging in this activity. The next slide, if I could. In addition to the legal opinion, the group asked me to comment a little bit on just my perspective on the economics of this situation. Part of my job is representing environmental organizations in cases at the Michigan Public Service Commission, which concern the rates and charges of utilities. I've been doing that since 2008. I've represented these organizations in at least 60 cases involving the rates and charges of DTE Electric alone. So I spent a lot of time with their books, essentially. And so this is not a legal opinion. This is just the observation of someone who's been doing this for a while, and also someone who was responsible for the budget of a small Midwestern city myself, and a small Midwestern municipal utility myself as an elected official. Generally speaking, there are three reasons, in my opinion, that in addition to being more green, municipal electric utility is more economically and financially beneficial to a city than being the customer of an IOU. The first is taxes. IOUs pass their taxes on to their customers. That includes federal income tax. It includes property taxes on assets. Those are all flowed through to the customers via various formulas in the rates and charges, and munis don't do that, don't need to do that. Return on equity is another one in the formula that's used to make rates for investor-owned utilities. They are entitled to an approved return on equity or profit on their entire rate base. DTE's rate base as of the last case, I think, is $17 billion. And they earn a 50% weighted rate of return on that, which is 9.9%. So it's a lot of money that goes towards shareholder profits, executive salaries, and executive bonuses. Municipalities don't do that. They don't need to do that. They borrow at municipal bond rates. They have a very affordable cost of capital, and they don't earn an ROE. Many municipalities make payments to the cities that own them, and we gave a couple of examples of that in the appendix to the report. Traverse City Light and Power pays 5% of its gross revenues to the city of Traverse City just as a contribution to the general fund. It adds up to a lot of money because it includes all of the gross revenues of that utility. The Holland Board of Public Works does it on a net basis. They grant 50% of the net income of their Board of Public Works back to the City of Holland, and a variety of other municipal electric utilities do that in a variety of ways. So in addition to lower costs, there's also a revenue benefit to the city of doing so. I knew an old salty lawyer who died recently at the age of, I think, 97 years old, and he once said to me, you know, we give away, meaning we, the government, we give away all the profitable enterprises, and we only keep the stuff that doesn't make money. And municipal electric utilities, if you keep them or if you reestablish them, are an exception to that rule. The other place that I wanted to highlight was the embedded costs of legacy generation, the old plant that is in the utilities rate base, old power plants, retired power plants, investments in pollution control technology on old fossil generated power plants, all are in the rate base. They stay in the rate base or they get securitized long after those assets are retired. So if you're the customer of so for example, Ann Arbor participated recently in a voluntary green pricing case that was a successful settlement, and Ann Arbor played a key role. Missy had excellent testimony in that case. The advocacy by your lawyer, Valerie Brader, was excellent in that case. I was in that case on behalf of NRDC and the Michigan Environmental Council, and there was a good settlement in that case, and it cut, among other things, the premium that's paid for green energy by customers who choose to opt in. But customers who choose to opt in and pay that premium are still paying for all the old fossil generation because it's embedded in the costs it's inescapable with the investor-owned utility, and that's not true of a municipal utility, especially a new one. They don't need to take on those legacy costs, and they can move solely with new sources of generation and renewable sources and other mechanisms that I heard about from some of the public commenters tonight. If I could go to the last slide. This is illustrative, and I don't offer it in place of Roshan's 14% number. This is kind of like my bottle cap collection. We sort of went around and found a few interesting things from the published rates of municipal utilities, put them in a drawer to examine further later. So this is not a scientific or systematic study. It's simply an illustration that of the reality that because of the reasons I mentioned, the economics of a municipal electric utility are more favorable than the economics of being the customer of an investor-owned utility or an IOU. So that's my last slide. And I'm happy to discuss anything further if you like, but those are all my comments that I prepared.
Thank you, Chris and Roshan.
Yeah, happy to take
very
questions.
helpful. I have a proposal, if I may, and that is we have a resolution and it's proposed to be introduced. And what I recommend that we do is do that, see if we get a first and a second motion to consider the resolution, and then open things up for discussion, including of the resolution and the slides and presented by Roshan and Chris, and then have a good lively discussion on that basis. Is that agreeable to everyone? So what I would ask you to do, Missy, is to open the resolution, and Ember, I believe you are going to introduce the resolution. Is that correct?
Mariska, I need a minute. We need to coordinate with CTN because I think it's cut out. So I need to be able to use, if you could give me just a minute, maybe to introduce.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, if anyone else hears that CTN is still down, please let me know via email and I'll try to take that on. Okay. All right, let me bring this up here. Is that correct? You just want me to bring up the resolution?
Yes, please.
Okay.
John, what do I need to do in order to introduce it? Do you just want me to describe where we're coming from with introducing this?
I would suggest that maybe once it's up on the screen, it's not too terribly long. So I thought maybe you could read through it and everybody can digest it. I don't know that everybody's done that. And you know, this is a pretty important and significant decision. So I think it's worthwhile reading through it, and then we'll open it up. If we, like I said, we'll ask for a motion to consider it, and then we can dive into both this as well as the content of the two presentations. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, Ember, go ahead and read it to us. If that's
okay. Okay, so this is the title says a draft Energy Commission resolution to recommend that City Council authorizes a feasibility study for a municipal utility. So whereas fossil fuel combustion, procurement, and transportation produce significant greenhouse gas emissions that raise global temperatures, which are already at harmful levels, leading to extreme weather events, droughts, massive flooding, and resultant death and displacement of thousands of people worldwide. Whereas City Council on November 4th, 2019, approved a resolution declaring a climate emergency and set a target date of 2030 to achieve citywide carbon neutrality. Whereas City Council, at its June 1st, 2020 meeting, approved the Living A20 Ann Arbor Carbon Neutrality Plan, incorporating the 2030 target. Whereas the generation of electricity accounts for roughly 40% of Ann Arbor's 1.8 million metric tons of annual greenhouse gas emissions. whereas the vast majority of this electricity is purchased from DTE Energy, whose monopoly service area includes Ann Arbor. Whereas in 2020, DTE generated 80% of its electricity by burning fossil fuels, mainly coal. Whereas DTE is currently building a 1.1 billion 1,100 megawatt gas-fired power plant in St. Clair County with an estimated useful life of at least 40 years. Whereas DTE's continued long-term reliance on fossil fuel combustion to generate electricity is incompatible with Ann Arbor's fossil fuel carbon neutrality goals. Whereas Michigan law authorizes municipal electric utilities, and at least 41 Michigan jurisdictions currently operate municipal munis, including the cities of Lansing, Holland, Wyandotte, Traverse City, and Chelsea. Whereas the Ann Arbor City Charter, Section 15.1 states that the city shall have all the powers granted by law to acquire, construct, own, operate, improve, enlarge, extend, repair, and maintain public utilities, including electric, light, and power. Whereas municipal electric utilities can freely obtain electricity, including clean energy, on the open market and can generate and distribute their own clean energy. Whereas cities typically authorize and fund feasibility studies by a qualified consultant to determine the short and long-term benefits and costs of establishing a municipal electric utility. Whereas recent feasibility studies by the city of Chicago, Illinois, and Pueblo, Colorado cost these cities approximately $120,000 each. Resolved that the Ann Arbor Energy Commission recommends that the Ann Arbor City Council authorize and fund a study to determine the feasibility of establishing a municipal electric utility, and resolved that the study be conducted by a qualified consulting firm using industry best practices.
Thank you very much. Do we have a motion to consider this resolution and a second? Motion from Commissioner McComber and a second from Councilmember Briggs. So we have both the presentation and the resolution itself in front of us for consideration, and I'd like to open it up for discussion and comments. And Bridget, you want to start?
Thanks. So I have a friendly suggestion on the resolution, which is perhaps in the very last line, provide a timeline by which we want to see this happen. I'm in favor of it overall, but I'm curious if these feasibility studies include the legal costs that are often entailed in cities pursuing this route. Does anybody know if that's the case with these feasibility studies, or if they're simply about logistics and technical matters?
Does anybody want to address that question directly? What I would offer is that one thing we would want to do with something like this is obviously there would be an RFP that would go out, and the RFP would have to define the scope of the study, and the scope of the study could specifically address your concern.
John, that's right on point. And historically, I've worked on a number of municipal studies. The cost that was quoted would not include any kind of a legal fee, because at this juncture, we're not taking any legal action. We're simply looking at the technical, economic, legalistic boundary conditions, I guess I'll say, that a consulting engineer would typically look at. An engineering firm is not a legal authority, but that would be the next step. You know, if the economic technical side of a feasibility study suggests that it go to the next level. And it sounds like the legal firm that was just talking on this matter has done a fair amount of work. I've seen their work before, and it sounds like they've investigated it and didn't find any, what I'll say, smoking guns or dead ends or showstoppers. So, you know, at this juncture, the technical economic component would be the most important to lead the effort, and then look at the legalistic issues secondarily.
Thanks, Chuck. By the way, I understand the concern, and I think that was a big element of costs in the case of municipalization in Boulder. But that would be something that would hopefully be identified in the feasibility study. And, you know, as I said, we could identify that in the scope. Larry, I think you were second. And then Ember and Chuck, if you still want to talk, leave your hand up. If not, take it down. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the legal aspects could be very, very, very costly, clearly, and very hard to predict, but I suspect that DTE will go to the mat with this one for sure. This is in many ways the loss of the grip that they have on power here in the state of Michigan. But that's not the reason I wanted to talk. There's another approach to this, which I didn't see actually outlined, and that is what is referred to as structural separation. So when Chuck did the excellent presentation talking about transmission, distribution, and supply. So those are three legs to the power supply of utility energy. Transmission and distribution are natural monopolies. You don't really need two sets of wires going to a house, two sets of wires going across the state. You really want to have certain monopolies. Supply has no such requirement. Supply as a monopoly is even worse. So a lot of the bad behaviors that we see and attribute to DTE, I think, are the result of that monopoly control of both distribution and supply. Doesn't have to be that way. It takes legislation to break it. It's called structural separation, so that the supply and the delivery is separate. In fact, in history of Michigan, transmission used to be all controlled by the same utilities. And that was basically broken out, and it's now a monopoly run mostly by another company called ITC. Most people don't even know about them, but they're out there. So a lot of this, I think, is something that could also have been considered. In fact, there was someone by the name of Gary Glenn who was promoting something called energy choice, which was basically allowing people the choice of their energy supply so that we no longer have a monopoly in the state of Michigan. Right now, that monopoly allows 90% control of all the electricity in DTE's area, and it leads to very bad behavior, in my opinion. It doesn't lead to lower costs. It doesn't lead to better reliability. It has a lot more to do with the power of a monopoly. And the problem with a monopoly isn't just that it's bureaucratic and not responsive to the market, but it is also in some ways corrupting. And so this is why I really think that that's also a part of what could have been considered in addition to municipalization. Because of the nature of DTE and the size of DTE, it's not just a monopoly, it's a for-profit monopoly. And it is conflicted because it's been in the entire supply chain of fossil fuels. It isn't just that they burn it, but they trade it and they transport it. They are a classic conflict of interest, and it's allowed to go on for all this time, and I just don't understand why. So I would wonder, and my question would be to Chris, have you given any consideration to the idea of structural separation as it relates to community aggregation and also to the sustainable energy utilities? Because once you have the ability to make your own choice, then you suddenly put the monopoly on their heels, and potentially we can end the monopoly completely, which is what we really need. We need a monopoly for transmission. We got one. We need a monopoly for distribution. We got one. We don't need one for supply. And that's my position. So, Chris, can you comment on this?
Certainly, Commissioner Kerber. I agree with many of your observations relative to the history of transmission in Michigan and relative to the importance of energy choice and generation choice. There are states where the investor-owned utilities operate as distribution monopolies and sometimes transmission monopolies, but the generation is all done by choice. Ohio runs like that. They have a whole set of mischief of their own in terms of affiliate relationships and bags of money apparently at the legislature. So I mean so I'm being a little bit of a smart aleck there. In that was an aside that was not germane to the point. But so I agree with you that generation choice, as a general matter, is a good thing. And I agree with you that a system in Michigan that had generation choice that was unlimited. Right now, there's a very small fraction, and it's not for residential customers. It's only for commercial and primary customers, and primary being the ones who take service off the transmission, and there's a 10% cap on that, and that cap is always fully subscribed. Those customers are driven by cost considerations more so than renewable, but the same way, it would work the same way with renewable. So that is a system that has greater opportunities. It has other potential downsides, as Ohio shows. You end up bailing out the generation in other ways. But generally the fact is that would require a sea change at the legislature and a sea change that would be directly adverse to the investor-owned utilities in Michigan. And I'm not a lobbyist and I'm not a politician, at least not anymore. But that's not something that, if you want to do something in Ann Arbor and you want to do something that is practical and direct and has a series of steps that you can undertake under existing law, municipalization is the thing. If you want to look at programmatic change across the state, then I would agree with all of your observations. Our requested task was to look at, could this be roadmapped to some kind of a conclusion under existing law? And the answer is that you could. You could create the public power company in Ann Arbor. The only other point I would note is that, I agree with you that there are some natural monopolies. I would also note that, distribution is not necessarily a natural monopoly, and there are cities in Michigan that have both, a muni operating and also have an IOU operating. In my alley at my house, I have, on the one side of the alley are the TCLP poles, and on the other side of the alley are the consumers poles headed up to the hospital providing service there. So it's not the end of the world to have, more than one set of distribution lines either. So that's just more of an editorial comment than a legal response. But I agree with all your premises. I agree with you about, programmatic change at the state level. Our job was just, I just work here, so to speak, and our job was to provide a specific roadmap under existing law, which municipalization definitely is.
Thank you. Can I interrupt for a second? Missy wants to jump in and make a public service announcement about
Yes.
CTN.
Public service announcement, power is down at CTN. So if you know of anyone that's trying to watch right now, they're not going to be able to get the live stream, but they can watch on YouTube, the YouTube channel. I don't know the magic of why that's possible, but direct people towards CTN Ann Arbor YouTube channel, and that's where folks can join. So sorry for the inconvenience.
They can also just call in and listen in, right? Yeah. I mean, they won't be able to see any presentations or anything like that, but Larry, did you have anything to follow up on, or can we move on to the next person?
No, I just wonder if it's something that could be considered, or at least as part of this whole discussion. I'm concerned that, leaving it out is something that, again, I mean, I think there's going to be politics no matter what you do. I understand that municipalization might have a clearer path. Maybe. I'm not sure.
Let's circle back and have a discussion on scope and alternatives and things like that. And we're probably not going to vote. We're not planning on voting this tonight, but we could vote on it as early as next month, or whatever we decide in terms of other perspectives that we want to gain. And we do have some speakers lined up from other cities that have tried municipalization, so we'll discuss that as the evening goes on. I think Ember, you were next, and then Chuck again, and then Robert.
Sure. I just have a couple things. One quick thing is, I think Chris has mentioned a couple of times this roadmap report that he produced for Ann Arbor for Public Power. So I don't think we shared that ahead of time as one of the one of the things that were included. So if people are interested in reading that, we can also share it with the commission or have it go up to on Legislar, just as a housekeeping note. The other quick thing that I was going to say is just that the Holland, Michigan Board of Public Works recently announced this summer that they're actually lowering their rates, and I just thought that was interesting to learn. I have a little quote pulled from an article that just was, it said, as a community-owned non-for-profit entity, Holland BPW turns each dollars our customers spend into the services provided for them. When we are able to experience lower costs, we pass that on through reduction. We pass on the reduction through in the reform of rate decreases. So I just think that that's like, especially as we talk finances, like for me, a big interest that I have in municipalizing our electric utility is thinking about things like that, where we have a model that is meant to serve our residents instead of being an investor-owned utility that's model, by definition is to benefit shareholders. And so I think that's really, I don't know, I just thought it was cool to see when do you hear about a utility lowering rates, right? And so just a cool example from Michigan. And the other brief thing I just wanted to add is that I think like we can continually discuss now, like whether or not we think municipalization is the best option, or we could discuss like when it hasn't or has worked in circumstances in different states across the country. But I think for this resolution, it was intentionally just to like focus on supporting a feasibility study, because we're really not going to know, what is best for Ann Arbor until we get the numbers. Kind of as Chuck alluded to earlier, like the first debate is really like an economic technical one that, by doing a feasibility study, we can see the costs at hand for Ann Arbor, and then that's a future discussion about whether we want to pursue that forward when we have the numbers on the table of what specifically it would cost as an estimate for the city of Ann Arbor. And so I think that's just what I want to focus on too, is that we're really just asking for a support of a feasibility study, not for a support unanimously of that you support municipalization. So it's very possible that you could still be skeptical of whether or not you support a municipal utility, but you might still be interested in knowing exactly what the numbers would be. It's theoretically possible that the numbers come back and even Ann Arbor for Public Power is like, yeah, this is not going to work here. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Commissioner Hookham.
I will be brief because I could speak on this topic for a long time. The things I wanted to point out, one comparison was comparing DTE or consumers energy to a municipality. It's important to understand when you hold up your hand that like DTE covers a big chunk of the thumb. It covers this little city called Detroit, a lot of the suburbs, and you're comparing DTE's service territory to a city like Lansing or a city like Traverse, or a city like Holland. Different scale, different structure, different issues pop up. And the requirement that the utilities supply electricity to all those customers across, in the case of DTE or consumers, a large geographical area, relatively speaking, is difficult. It's not simple. So it's really difficult when you're looking at comparing structurally how these entities serve the people that they are, the customers, the ratepayers. A little bit different story, and I could draw that up a little bit later. I gave everybody on this call, at least our team on the commission, a slide that shows how Lansing is served and the power requirements to serve that city relative to the renewable piece that it currently has, and how difficult it is to move from the structure they've got now. And Lansing Board of Water and Light has a strong renewable energy goal, but they recognize how difficult it is to move that way quickly without burdening their customers. So there's a fine balance between reliability, cost, and how to make this happen. And we all know that Boulder pretty much gave up and chose not to go down the municipality route. A lot of lessons to be learned there, how they were able to excel to deliver what they really desired might be a candidate to look at and compare to. So I'll just say that. The other piece of it is, if we do move toward a study, I would really like for this commission and OSI to work together to make that happen in terms of what's the scope, schedule, cost, what's considered, what's not. I think there's a lot of important information that could be gleaned from the members that I'm talking about to make that happen. And I just want to ensure that that is something going forward if we take this on. So thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. By the way, people are allowed to speak twice. So if anyone that has spoken desires to speak again, I see Larry's raised his hand again, that you're certainly encouraged to do that. So Commissioner George, then Commissioner Radina, then Commissioner Kerber.
Two quick questions. Amber, I was just curious, and I guess any of the other public power folks on here, Chuck alluded to, the scope and, the overall cost and what exactly this feasibility study would be looking like. I read a little bit about the feasibility study in Chicago and the feasibility study they did in Pueblo. I was just curious, is there going to be a need for another follow-up feasibility study? Is it going to be, a two-step approach here? I mean, have you thought that far out? Or is it going to be one big feasibility study? Just as an idea of like what we're dealing with here as we're discussing what is immediately in front of us.
So I can actually speak to that. Basically, yeah, there would need to be more stuff if the first one goes well. So, if we have the first study and we say, oh, wow, this ends up looking like it could be a really good idea, it could really work for Ann Arbor, then yes, naturally you will need to sort of look more into more of the details and the operational things and potentially contract out more to figure that out. But that's kind of, it's down the road, all depending on what the results of the initial study are.
I think to Chuck's point too, that like the more coordinated the first one is, like the more information we're likely to glean from it. Like if we're really careful about the process and what the request for proposals is, and it's something that's a collaborative effort to make sure we have the ask we want to have in the first one, that could limit what is needed in the second one. I also know, like, for example, we've talked to Decorah, Iowa, which has had a feasibility study, and I know that they had two, but it was because the first one was funded and created by, like, through fundraising campaign from residents, but when then the city wanted to do their own, even though they ended up commissioning the same company and it ended up having similar results. And so that was also a strategy here, is try to like first have it in the city's control just the first go around, so there wouldn't need to be unnecessary spending and time spent by having it, have two very similar studies conducted.
Can I jump in with a question real quickly? And that is, at one time I know that A2P2 had a timetable in mind, and we've been talking about possible iterative approach. Is how important is timing in all of this, or is that something for consideration and discussion later?
I think some of the consideration of timetable is knowing that like the feasibilities take a significant amount of time to conduct. And so we need to like consider the fact that it could be 3 to 6 months, if not longer, before we get back the results of a feasibility study, especially if it is one that is thorough. And ultimately, at some point in the line of creating municipal utility, the public needs to vote on the measure. So it's also worth considering the timing of a of like when the public can vote on things.
Okay.
And my second question there, in that same kind of timeline that you mentioned, Chair Mursky, I was just curious, what the conversations, I presume there have been. If there haven't been, that'd be good to know too, with Ann Arbor for Public Power, Ember, and anybody with Mayor Taylor and, council leadership. I'm sure the two council members might be able to get into this a little bit, but where, this would fit both within the current city budget, where are they going to pull out $120,000, as well as additionally where this fits in with the political goals that the council has in the short run. I was just curious if any of those conversations had happened yet.
Do either of the council members care to comment, or Missy, any comments from your side? Or have those discussions even taken place? You can give us a hint.
My questions were along similar lines, so I think that's something that still needs to be discussed.
You were next in line anyhow, so why don't you, Commissioner George, do you have anything else to say, or again?
No, that was just my my thoughts on it. I just know that as someone that's been involved with a lot of big labor campaigns and so forth, that, you know, when you're trying to do something this transformational, you know, that early buy-in from local elected officials can be get you very far in getting it accomplished. So, you know, that is just a small piece of advice I would hope that you guys might be able to pick up on. Thanks.
If you take your hand down and put it back up if you have another question, that'd be great. Councilmember Radina, go ahead with comments or questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Mirsky. And my questions, I guess, or comments maybe even, follow up pretty closely to Commissioner George's. And I don't want to put Missy on the spot either. I don't know that she would have an answer to the questions, but some of it I think would result in council members making a decision, but knowing that that this wasn't budgeted for this year, and we do have a structural deficit we're contending with. One of the things that I'm already thinking about in my head is how to pay for even I would say if it's $120,000, I think that's probably on the more modest end of what this might end up costing if I'm kind of looking at some of the other places and additional studies. And if we want it to be more comprehensive, so that there aren't multiple that need to go one right after another, it might be on the higher end. Somebody already mentioned kind of a legal feasibility study also, which I looked at Pueblo, and I think that they had an additional $250,000 wrapped up into that, if I'm not mistaken. And so I guess I'm thinking, Missy, historically, this is where I'm still going to play the newness card. My newness to council doesn't necessarily lend itself to it. When we do these things generally throughout the year, I wouldn't want this necessarily to pull resources out of your existing budget and cut from the work that you're already doing. And so I guess I'm wondering, to the extent that that's something that you would anticipate happening, or is that truly just a decision of council to figure out where this money would come from?
Thank you for the question. So because of the structural deficit and the way that we did our budget, we tapped into reserve funding. So something like this might traditionally be a contention, like to go to the reserves, but as you know, we're dipping into that right now. So that could be something council were to consider, but it is not something that I have modeled in terms of like what we would not do if it came from OSI's budget. And if we do pass this, I anticipate we're going to be asked to look at that as well as some other folks. So I think that would likely be a council decision. It would be a mid-year budget adjustment. So it's not a simple straight vote. I think it's an 8-vote item.
Thank you. Councilmember Radina, I assume that's you're done, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Larry.
Yes, thanks, John. So one of the things that I was wondering about when you talk about stranded assets, the older assets that are both utility, both consumers and DT have plenty of. And of course, as we walk away from those costs, someone else has more of those costs. And we are part of a community of not only cities, but other rural areas and so forth. So doing this, I mean, one of the reasons why this probably would be a very scary thing for the utilities is because it could precipitate a lot of people moving away from these costs in addition to just the city of Ann Arbor. So I'm happy if we could have taken the $1.1 billion plant that they're building in St. Clair and stuck that on the DTE shareholders and not on the ratepayers. Unfortunately, that's not what happens in the state of Michigan. So I think it's an important question, and I really direct this to Chris and any of the other advocates. what do we do when everybody else says, how come Ann Arbor has just done this and stiffed us and left us with all the old equipment? Chris?
So I guess I have a couple answers to those questions, Commissioner Kerber. One is that in setting the formulas for utility rates, a loss of customers and a loss of load without any corresponding reduction in embedded costs is going to drive higher rates for the customers who remain. It's also going to eliminate the, it's going to reduce the demonstrated capacity need for certain expensive assets as well, right? DTE has 3 coal plants. One retired last month, a month and a half ago. 2 are scheduled to retire a couple of years from now, and then another one is slated for 2030, 2031 timeframe, and then Monroe for 2040. So when you take down the load and the demand that the utility has, because it has taken on a loss of load through a loss of customers, the utility is going to have a harder time justifying continued maintenance of some of those assets in the rate base, and is going to have to retire some more. Is committed to securitizing a couple of those plants, which will be a lower cost of debt moving forward. So I guess that's maybe getting down in the details and the weeds, but the point I think is that you're going to have an amount of fixed costs which are going to be spread over a smaller number of customers, but you're also going to have an obligation by the utility to take some of these assets out of rate base to account for the fact that the load is lower. Staying in a bad relationship because it might cost somebody else more money is, that's a policy decision that each community would have to make for itself. I can't tell you there wouldn't be a financial impact on the residual customer base, but I also would say there would be an affirmative obligation on the utility, and the regulators would be looking at, and the interveners would be looking at. They really need to retire more of those assets. And the first ones that could come off would be the dirtiest ones. So in some ways, by taking load off the system, you're going to force some additional fossil retirements. So you'll have something of a clean benefit on for the rest of the customer base as well. Theoretically, all other things being equal and all those other qualifiers that you have to make.
Thank you, Larry. Any follow-up?
No, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
By the way, I think this is somewhat relevant to the discussion, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was just a ruling from the California Public Service Commission, CPC actually, I think it's, in any case, related to CCAs, and they have agreed to apply something like a surcharge for 2 communities that are using CCAs, specifically to address the question that you raised, Larry. Actually, the mention of it included a mention of Paul Fenn, who presented to us about CCAs, and that he was disappointed, obviously, with the ruling, but it was based somewhat on the same concerns that you're raising, Larry, about what is the impact on the remaining customer base and equity issues and things like that. I don't know if that would be relevant at some point here, but in any case, since we've also discussed CCAs, I thought I'd bring it up. Commissioner Briggs.
Yeah, thank you. This is a exciting topic and a fascinating presentation and discussion. I did want to ask a couple of questions, and then also, I know we've got 2 other resolutions that we're considering tonight, so this is first reading, so just wanted to point to that time issue. So my questions, I guess one is for Missy in terms of her understanding of kind of what might come after. Obviously, it entirely depends on what would be included in an RFP like this, but in terms of sort of the previous presentations we received, if I recall correctly, there certainly is usually a follow-up and much more expensive study that occurs following a feasibility study, and that the costs associated with implementing this type of program would be more a part of that second phase. Is that correct? And could you talk a little bit more about that from how you understand it?
Yeah. And I also want to thank Chris for the presentation, because I think it very much, I don't know about you, but it mirrors almost identically what Valerie Brader told us in her presentation about the process. And so understanding all of that, is the question about legality is pretty much resolved. The question about cost is not. And so the technical study seems like it would give us direction, direction on cost. And then we would have to do the much more detailed analysis if we decide to go, that will really get into, are we standing up parallel infrastructure, or are we going to do eminent domain and take the infrastructure? And that, it's true, it's sort of like a gateway process that we'd have to go through. Like $120,000 investment doesn't get it on the ballot, right? Like we have other things. We have to do due diligence for sure, which is what we would want to do, obviously understand that infrastructure and make an informed decision. And you didn't ask this, but just want to tee this up too. In October, Boulder is coming, and we're trying to have Winter Park, Florida come as well to talk about those other elements. So not necessarily the first phase, but like, what is the process actually like from their experience, like from soup to nuts, right? Thinking through that. So that's on October. Unfortunately, was the first time that Boulder was free to join us for that.
No, actually, that was going to be kind of part of my next set of comments. So since we have some presentations in the fall, one of the pieces that's certainly in my mind, and in terms of moving this sort of study forward, is one, if we were to bring this to council before the next budget cycle, it would require 8 votes as a budgetary amendment. We are dealing with really challenging budgets right now, so as it should be, there's a lot of scrutiny around those, and so I would think that there would be desire from folks to really see that we've done as much work as we can on this piece. I think another question that council might have prior to November, we'll see what happens, but I know that there's a desire to and I guess figuring out if voters are interested in supporting funding for climate action in Ann Arbor. And so understanding kind of what the resources are that we're working with in our community, I think is also is a question that many would have. So just a couple of thoughts on maybe when we might want to consider how that relates to us considering this kind of a second reading.
Thank you. Other commissioners? I have a few thoughts that I would like to share, if I may. I'll try to keep it brief. As mentioned, we've got some other topics to cover. First of all, I would encourage commissioners to take this issue seriously and study it. We obviously plan on doing that in commission meetings, but if we were to do something like this, it's not just the $120,000 that we're talking about. It's the direction that we would recommend to City Council that the city might take. And so this is an important decision. And I think all of you probably have a good sense of all the different other issues that City Council considers. And so the position that we take will carry obviously some weight, because the rest of the council is not going to have the time to invest into this. So this is an important decision for us. Just a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share with you. It just so happens that my son lives in Decorah, Iowa. And indeed, I spoke twice with the person that headed up the initiative there and put the A2P2 people in touch with him. And it's instructive to study cases like that. That actually went to a vote. They lost. They're pursuing it again. They think their chances are actually very good. At least that was about 2 or 3 months ago. But one of the things that I think we need to consider and contend with is, when this happened the first time, the consultant for this group in Decorah estimated that purchasing the grid assets from the local utility. Alliant would cost $7 million. Alliant engaged their own consultants, and they estimated that the value of the grid assets was $50 million. And there was an estimate from the one group that it would be a 30% reduction, and the other people said it was going to be a 30% increase. So one of the things that we have to think about this is conflicting information. Also, in the case of Decorah, the utility spent 5 times as much money as the group that was leading the initiative. So there's a whole lot of different things that we need to take into consideration. And one that's on top of the things that we've been talking about, the $120,000, there's an opportunity cost if we were to do that somewhere else in the city budget, or taking on, going into the reserve. So we have a lot of things to consider, and we'll have an opportunity to talk. And Missy, I'll ask you to talk a little bit more about that, and we talk maybe for a few minutes about timeline, and if there's any commissioners have any concerns about that. One of the things that I would hope that we would do is, if we do proceed with a study, that part of the scope include what are alternatives to municipalization. A number of people have brought those up, including Commissioner Kerber, and what are the risks and opportunities associated with those in those various pathways. That's what I wanted to mention, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner McCoy, who has some last words for us, other than maybe just talking about the timeline going forward.
Yeah, I just quickly, because Boulder was mentioned a few times, I know that we had asked Chris Bistock to look into a little bit of the legal challenges of Boulder and how they may be similar, may not be similar to Ann Arbor. So I was wondering if, since we have him here today, if he could briefly talk about that, if he's still on.
So I'm still here, and we did cover that in an appendix to our report. I did not, I'm not as familiar with that because somebody else did that. And so I would just suggest that we release that, at least that appendix, and provide that. So we did look into that. We do think there are substantial differences, but I would be less comfortable because I did not do that original research.
There is some good online material that describes the whole history of the Boulder municipalization effort, and it was marred or burdened, if you will, maybe by a lot of legal questions. So it was not just something where it's more clear cut like Ann Arbor, but as Missy said, we think that there probably are lessons learned, to be applied to Ann Arbor, and obviously we'd like to learn those before we proceed. Missy, anything else to add for your side, and when we might have a sense of when we might be able to get additional presentations, and if anybody that's on participating in the discussion, including Roshan and Chris and Ember, whether that timetable is suitable or is appropriate, including also obviously all the other commissioners. Go ahead.
Yeah, on the presentation, we had reached out to a handful of places that have successfully municipalized and not, to try to kind of see process. And unfortunately, the first available we got was October. So we even offered this meeting to try to get on calendars as soon as possible. And so October 12th, we've got Boulder in queue, and even during this meeting, I slightly multitasked and resent the invitation to Winter Park, Florida, to try to get them on. So if folks have other recommendations on folks you'd like to bring in to hear from, please let me know, because we do have a little bit of a window to try to get them in. But October 12th, we're planning to have it be a focused conversation on the topic.
Any thoughts or comments now? And you're not limited to making them now. I mean, we're all available to discuss this afterwards, or you can reach us via email. There was some emails preceding this meeting where we had originally talked about considering this later, but there was some strong pushback from Ann Arbor Public Power, and we moved this forward, and we could potentially juggle things going forward again. Should we close the subject and move on. Does anybody have any additional final comments? Okay. So thank you very much, both to Roshan, Chris, and as well as to Ember. Thanks for all your work on this. I will make sure that everybody does have access to the report. Missy, is this report something that we could potentially put on Legistar even?
If that's okay with Ember, I don't have it, I don't think.
Yeah.
I can send it
Okay.
after the meeting. Yeah.
Okay,
It would be great because we've referred to it several times. That'd be great.
great.
Thanks
Yeah,
again,
happy to.
Chris and Roshan. You're welcome to stay on. You might find the other topics interesting, but we know that you're juggling other priorities as well, including family and dinner probably.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the next point on our agenda is the benchmarking resolution. I think Missy, someone from OSI is going to present on this, correct?
I think Thea is with us if she wants to jump in, and I can pull up the screen while she's popping in here. Just a friendly reminder. Hi, Thea. We had talked about this at the last meeting. Thea's here to answer any questions on the benchmarking ordinance itself. And then the draft resolution is just a resolution of support as this moves forward, hopefully very near term for final legal review and then council consideration. So Thea, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the resolution. There's been a few minor adjustments of the resolution that was shared before, so I'm not sure if it got put in the recent agenda or not, but it's things like just revising like the purpose of the ordinance. It hasn't been like actual structural change, but just flagging that.
Yeah, and building on that for folks, just want to share the purpose really is tight in that it's about consumer protection pretty explicitly and making sure that people have the information to make informed decisions when they go to rent, whether they're a small business, whether they are an individual that's renting an apartment, et cetera. And again, this may be extraneous information that someone does not care about, but it is a consumer protection. You have the right to know how efficient a place is or is not, if that's an important factor in your decision making. So that's the language she's talking about, but the process of what the ordinance does has not changed.
So I think we had a pretty robust presentation and discussion on this. And I think we've all had a chance to look at it. Missy, I don't know if you want to pull it up just in case. But I'm wondering while you're doing that, if we can at least get a motion in a second to consider it, then we can discuss it. And if there's no discussion, then we can vote on it. So moved by Mark.
Second.
For Clevey, and a second from Commissioner George. Thank you. So this is a relatively short resolution. We can see it all right here. And as has already been stated, this is really, to raise awareness and to protect consumer rights here. So any discussion from anyone, any questions of Thea? Yes, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry, I don't have my notes from our previous meeting in front of me where we discussed this, so I could just be forgetting this. Is there a stakeholder group that's the city's consulting with in terms of how this might be implemented practically with different sort of landlords around the community, and just what that means?
Yeah, we met with a stakeholder task force of building owners, energy service providers, DTE, affordable housing representatives. We had, I think, 6 meetings with them. So they developed, or we co-created the ordinance recommendations. We took that back internally and refined it based on what was feasible, brought it back one last time to the stakeholder task force and got like a final wrap up there. So yes, there has been stakeholder engagement process.
That's great. And the only reason I bring this up is, I think I fully support this. I think it's great to be moving forward consumer protections. This is, great progress forward for the community. I think we've been we're in the process of doing some ordinance revisions around our leasing ordinance, and we've done some other changes that have impacted that sort of community. And I think they're on edge a little bit more and a little bit more organized as each sort of ordinance moves forward. And so I guess I would just, the more engagement we do with them while this is kind of in legal getting reviewed, I think the better, so that there's not just a lashing out against it would be helpful.
Thea, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a fairly diverse group of people that were involved in the drafting of the ordinance as well. It wasn't just the focus groups, including, if I recall correctly, Jan Culbertson, I think, was involved within the 2030 district. And the 2030 district represents a pretty broad group of property owners in the multifamily and commercial areas. So there really was a good engagement process that OSI employed. Is that correct, Thea?
That's correct. And we also had a pretty diverse group of property managers and building owners. And just kind of aside, we got a lot of recommendations on the ordinance itself that's included in there, but we also heard a lot of kind of more softer recommendations of what people wanted to see implementation wise to really reduce the burden. And so that was like one of the more important information that we pulled from that was, how do we make this as easy as possible? So there's both the ordinance itself, legally what it looks like, and then also how do we make this, you know, a benefit and not another thing to do.
Just two other points on that to share. We also put the ordinance, the draft language out for full public comment and advertise that to try to get more stakeholders, not just the task force for sure, to share input. And then to Thea's point, we anticipate some serious handholding at the beginning to try to make this really easy for folk. I mean, that's part of what we're budgeting as we roll this out. It's not just drop this and expect people to perform. We anticipate having some interns who are helping pull data and getting it into the system and trying to build an API and figuring out how to do this. So I just want to applaud Thea and Zach for their work on this, trying to figure out how to not just build an ordinance, but really build a program that's wildly successful.
And I'd like to remind everybody that we have a second ordinance in the works that addresses the other sectors that are not impacted by this ordinance. So if the combination of the two in effect equally address all sectors, we have this energy audit disclosure ordinance that's been in the works, and we would have considered that tonight, but we had a relatively full agenda. So Missy, I think we bumped that to our next meeting, correct? Yeah. So any further discussion? Can we, before we take a vote, any other comments or questions for Thea or for each other? So all those in favor of approving the resolution as was just presented, please raise your hand or say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. Work well done, Thea. Thank you very much. Take that back to the rest of the team and tell them you got maybe not quite standing ovation on Zoom, but close as you can get to that on Zoom.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good. So the next point we have on our agenda is another resolution that we considered in our last meeting, and that is the resolution on low carbon materials in construction, or embodied carbon resolution as we refer to it in the agenda. And Missy, I believe we have Alex Reese waiting in the peanut gallery.
He's joining us as we speak. Yeah.
Waiting to present a couple of slides to update us on a couple of things related to the resolution before we consider it. Welcome, Alex. We'll unmute you here in a second. There we are.
Hello.
So I wanted to also pass on regrets from Jan Culbertson, and she would have liked to have been here tonight, but she had a conflict, and Alex is representing both himself, he was on the meeting last time, as well as Luca, Henry, and so take it away, Alex. We have a short slide deck that we're going to present. Missy, if you can pull that up, that would be
Yeah,
great.
Alex, do you want to present or do you want me to present?
I don't have it up right now, so if you do,
Understood.
that would be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Alex.
Awesome. Okay, so this is a similar presentation to what you all saw last week, but pretty much we just tried to trim it down a little bit for a reminder. So yeah, this is the low embodied carbon material construction resolution. My name's Alexander Reese, and Luca and Jan are also a part of this. So the goals of this resolution, there's 3 of them, and I'll go through them one at a time. So first, we want to highlight the importance of embodied emissions. If you want to go to the next slide. There are 2 different kind of sectors of emissions in the building sector in general, one of which is embodied carbon and one of which is operational carbon. Embodied carbon represents kind of manufacturing, transporting, and installing buildings and construction materials, whereas operational carbon is the carbon associated with the running of the building, so the lights, the heating, the cooling, stuff like that. Next slide. This is a breakdown of the emissions from various sectors in the economy. You can see the building and operation emissions there are in yellow, and about a third of the emissions in this sector come from the actual embodied emissions, and the embodied emissions represent about 11% of overall emissions. And in the next slide, you'll see that transitioning to 2050, embodied carbon will be about half of all new emissions from a life cycle perspective in the building sector. Next slide. Thank you. And so the second point here is, now we know embodied emissions are a problem, so we want to develop local expertise in a way to try to create low embodied carbon materials. And so the next couple slides will go over kind of how we started that. So the Ann Arbor 2030 district, which Jen represents, and the low embodied carbon concrete task force worked together to create these 3 kind of specifications for what we wanted to do. The first of which was to develop recommendations for concrete that will lower embodied carbon in concrete and can be implemented in southeastern Michigan. And then we wanted to come up with some recommendations based on feedback from professionals and industry members on how we could potentially implement that. And then finally, discuss policies and find ways to promote these sorts of materials. So there's a link to the task force presentation if any of you are interested there, which goes into a bit more detail on this. Here's kind of just a list of everybody who participated in this. And yeah, so on the next slide, this is kind of what we found the breakdown to be for GHG emissions in concrete. You can see cement is about 13% of concrete by mass, but it accounts for about 80% of overall emissions. So cement is a large focus in trying to reduce the overall emissions embodied in concrete. So on the next slide, you'll see that so we'll go over a couple of different ways in which reducing emissions is possible. The first of which is probably the most broadly used around industry, which is PLC, or Portland limestone cement. Pretty much that's just taking clinker, which is a product which becomes cement, and we replace some of it with limestone, which pretty much decreases the GHG emissions from cement in general. And so this is one method that is very effective at lowering the GHG emissions from concrete. Another method on the next slide is well-graded aggregate. This is a method in which you can use kind of a scale of aggregates to more thoroughly fill in the holes inside of concrete. And This then reduces the cement content. You can see on the bottom there, these gray squares kind of show how much cement is being used in each of these concrete mixes. And so the more we fill in with this well-graded aggregate, the less cement we use per kind of cubic meter of concrete, and thereby can dramatically lower the emissions associated with it. Another method we can do on the next slide is supplementary cementitious materials, which I can never say right in the first time. And these are just ways of replacing concrete with some other material, which can actually end up improving the performance and creates a nice synergy with some, as we transition out of fossil fuels, there's lots of waste and byproducts from these processes, and these are great options for use in concrete, which then lower the overall GHG emissions of concrete by using less cement, while also creating a way in which we can take care of a product which otherwise would have just been landfilled. So one of these is fly ash from coal combustion, another is slag from steel production. And on the next slide, you can see pozzolans are also an option here. Specifically, ground glass pozzolan is one that we've been testing. And all of these can make large strides in reducing the overall embodied emissions of concrete. So on the next slide, you'll see here is kind of a breakdown of the various mixes that the task force ended up trying. So on the left there, you can see is this just a standard mix, normal everything. One to the right is a 40% slag replacement. So that's taking 40% of the cement content and replacing it with slag. And then there's ground glass pozzolan, 40%. Over one more is PLC, which is that limestone cement mentioned earlier, which is replacing some of the cement with a limestone, which lowers the GHG. And then the PLC with 40% slag and the PLC with 40% GGP. So to summarize pretty much, the task force found that by using these various methods, we can reduce the overall emissions of concrete by about 37%, which in the future, hopefully with increased improvements, we can get that up to 50%, which is a massive reduction given that globally, concrete is responsible for about 7% of overall emissions. So this is really an exciting opportunity. Here is an example of a pour we actually just did on Friday. So this is over in the Tri-Delta sorority. Their driveway needed a re-upping of their concrete. So we decided to use one of these mixes and poured it. And the construction workers said they really enjoyed using it, and everything went really well. So it seems very promising that this will be a great option for Ann Arbor in the future. Just to kind of give a scale for how much emissions can be reduced through using these various types of concrete. If we were to create a 10-story building and use a 40% or I guess 37% GHG reduction concrete on it, that would be equivalent to powering a mid-sized city, so roughly Ann Arbor, for about 11 hours, which is, I don't know, it seems like a lot to me. And next slide. So finally, we want to communicate methods, additionally communicate methods to reduce the embodied emissions. So we know it's an issue, and we've come up with some different ways in which we can help mitigate that issue. And so now we want to create a method in which people can take advantage of those ways we came up with. So this is where a lot of the work I've done on the project comes in, and also Luca, who couldn't make it today. But we've been working on creating a resource guide, which there's a little detail on the next slide. And that goes into various ways where we can calculate embodied emissions. So whether that's kind of collecting various life cycle analysis, also called EPDs, which are environmental product declarations. It's kind of like a nutrition label for a product, but instead of calorie count, it gives you the global warming potential. And so there's ways in which you can collect those and compare them or create them for new mixes and new materials. So we've given some options there in the resource guide. We've also gone through several different techniques for how we can reduce the global warming potential of concrete and cement. And this is by no means an exhaustive list either on here or on the resource guide, but it does provide a lot of good resources for people to reach out to and take advantage of. And then finally, we want to highlight the local projects like that pour that just happened Friday, as well as research in various contexts in the area to help people take advantage of all of this. And then we also go over a couple of other local policies at the city and state levels across the country and how they're implementing similar techniques and how we can kind of base what we do off of that as well. So that was just kind of a brief rundown of everything. I'm happy to take any questions, or I can cede the floor to John and we can talk about the resolution and the changes that were made.
Missy, would you mind going back to the presentation quickly and going to the task force slide? And while you're doing that, just a few comments. First of all, I want to say I appreciate comments offered in the last meeting, in particular from Councilmember Briggs, as well as outside the meeting by two commissioners, Commissioner Clevey and Commissioner Hookham, who both provided recommendations. And I want to also apologize, maybe is not the appropriate word, for the way this was developed. This came relatively late to the commission in the overall process. Admittedly, this went back in March to OSI staff. It was shared with others at the city. And it wasn't something that I mentioned, unfortunately, in meetings, but I do want to demonstrate here through this list of participants that it was a broad-based group of people that worked on this. And you can see there's people from all different kinds of interests, including from the Michigan Concrete Association, as you can see in the lower left. Dan DeGraff was actually present at the pour that Alex mentioned at the Tri-Delt Association. There was also a pour the day before on Thursday on South Industrial Highway, where there's repairs being made. They're using also a low embodied concrete, energy concrete. So first of all, I just, in terms of process, a commitment to try to do this better in terms of informing commissioners of an opportunity to contribute to this, but I hope that the final product is indeed a good one. And as I said, we did get a lot of good comments. So Missy, what I'd like you to do is bring up the resolution. It's a rather long one. And what I thought I would do is have it on the screen, but summarize the major changes. Missy, I'm going to get with you. There's a few minor spelling or grammar kinds of mistakes, like capitalization, like changing a word, some words in a whereas statement. So if we slowly scroll down so people can see it again. In the fifth whereas statement, starting with the city of Ann Arbor, for example, that should be a capital city, I think, with a C. And then later, and it says the A2 zero or the A2 plan, we'll change that to the A2 zero carbon neutrality plan. That's the formal name of the plan. If you keep on scrolling down so people can see it.
I just needed a second to capture the notes for the changes.
Yeah, I can send you these.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's great.
Or whatever. I made a few minor changes. So other than capitalizations, you can scroll down. There's two places where Commissioner Clevey made comments that we incorporated about innovation, and the Office of Sustainability and Innovation has a responsibility to encourage, enable, and unleash the power of innovation, and that's what we're trying to do with this resolution. And so we address that. And then I think the other substantive change, Commissioner Hookham suggested a bunch of what I'll say is relatively minor changes. They're all in the text here, which is posted to Legistar. But the one thing that I wanted to discuss was the third resolved. And go to the next page. Yeah, so this was a concern that Councilmember Briggs raised. And so we hope that this language addresses your concern. So we say here at the bottom of the page and then the top of the next one. So we're asking council and the city to engage in working with the city planning commission or department and commission to urge owners, developers, and property users to reuse or repurpose existing buildings of meaningful size as a means of minimizing total net carbon footprint of construction while not obstructing new development with significant social or total life cycle environmental benefits. So what we're trying to do here is to say, we recognize that it's important to utilize embodied carbon where we have it and where it can justifiably be reused. And by the way, I think I mentioned where there's work being done on what's called a construction and demolition ordinance that would hopefully divert more of those materials from landfill. But what we're talking here is in some cases, it may make sense to reuse or repurpose part of an existing building, a basement or a foundation or whatever the case may be. But we do not want to obstruct new development where if we look at the total social benefits or the total life cycle benefits, considering things like the reduction in vehicle miles traveled and things like that, that this is not being used. The statement is not being, or the old statement in this resolution is not being used to obstruct them where maybe a single family home is being replaced by 50 units of housing that has a lot of other benefits. So this is the way that we've addressed that. And what I ask then at this point is if we can get motions to consider the resolution, open up the discussion, and then take a vote. We have a motion from Commissioner Clevey. Do we have a second? From Commissioner Briggs. I'd like to open the floor then for discussion. Anybody have any comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner or Councilmember Briggs, and then Commissioner Hookham.
My only comment was just thanks for making those changes. That definitely those revisions were very much in line with my thinking.
Great. Thanks very much, and thanks for raising the concern. Commissioner Hookham.
Good afternoon or evening or night. I don't know what it is. It's getting dark in my neck of the woods, but I'll be brief, and that is thank you for the efforts here. I think it's great that we're looking at embodied carbon. Unfortunately, because of the building code, we can't enforce much here. We're going to recommend that we adopt things like this in our practice of permitting buildings, but reality is we can't enforce anyone to do this work. I would hope that we would take the measure to start moving in that direction. Some of our codes are moving in that direction, as you know, John, and team that wrote this. The Architecture 230 movement and all those are pushing for a change to the Michigan Building Code. Those kinds of things need to be in there, not just the HVAC changes and other areas of energy, but actually embodied carbon. I don't know how to make that happen, but I just wanted to raise that this is a nice start, but we are nowhere near being close to the end of getting this adopted. Thank you.
And thank you. And I see some nodding heads there. Real briefly, we had planned actually a presentation for tonight on proposed changes to the state energy code. There was a conflict or family emergency that prevented that from happening. So indeed, we will cover that as soon as we can, hopefully next month. And what we hope to do is get behind the proposed changes. I think potentially we'll have a number of speakers addressing that. And we, as Chuck, as you point out, that's really important. And what's important to realize for everybody, and this will be definitely addressed when we present it, is that we'll have an opportunity with the new code and the appendices to essentially, as a municipality, be able to implement the zero code. here in Ann Arbor. So we can talk more about that. Missy, I don't know if you want to say more.
Yeah, I do. It's really time sensitive, and I'm sorry that Charlotte Jameson couldn't join us. She really did want to join us, but this is actually super time sensitive because comments are due to Laura, the state licensure office, by the 16th, which is Friday, on the code. And so there are two codes that are open for consideration. It's the energy code and the residential code right now. So we are, as an office, working with other municipalities to try to get in comment. And then there's a public meeting on the 20th up in Lansing where we can share feedback. What's exciting, there's many exciting things that are going on, but one is that they're starting from the 2021 code, which is great because we're on the 2015 code right now, and there is a 2018 code. So we're kind of starting from the right place, and the goal is to keep us there, not to move us backwards. And so there's the code, and then there's the zero code appendix that John just mentioned. And so we want the code, we want the zero code appendix, and to Chuck's point, we want it to go slightly further and be considering embodied carbon as well. So there is a lot that is happening right now at this moment. It is fast and it is furious. But if you are interested, please let myself or Zach West-Smith know, and we can loop you into what we're doing. Chuck, I see you, and you are in. Yeah, we're running at this one.
Yeah, this is a huge opportunity. We're currently based on the ASHRAE standard 2013, and by upward revision of the code, there's pretty substantial energy savings opportunities. So hopefully in the next meeting, we will address exactly Chuck's points in parallel, obviously, to what is going on at the state level. Any other comments or questions? So what I would ask is then we'll take a vote on approving the resolution. All those in favor of approval, raise your hand or say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Very good. We're making good progress. So we now are up to reports and updates in a final round of public input. Missy, you want to kick us off with an update from the Energy Office, and then we'll open up to commissioners and then committee updates.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair Mirsky. I'm coming off vacations. The cobwebs still exist a little bit, so I'm going to shake them out to give kind of a quick update on a few things. One is we have a few new commissioners that might be joining us at our next meeting. So I just wanted to share that they'll go before council on the 20th. So we have 3 folks that we're recommending, and I just wanted to let you all know. You might have noticed, I'm not sure if I've communicated this, and apologies if I haven't, Josh McDonald is no longer with the city. He's moved on to new opportunities. So that is a loss for us, but also an opportunity to really recalibrate and think about where we have strategic opportunities, because staffing is one of the most important things that we have available to us. So for the time being, forgive me for slowness in response, but please let me know if you need anything administratively. I'm going to try to step into those shoes, but I do apologize in advance for perhaps slow responses. Just wanted to share that update. And then kind of fun things happening as I try to find where this is my notes. The projects we talked about previously, just quick updates. The landfill solar project is an environmental assessment. They'll be out tomorrow doing some of the first wetland delineation and sampling that we need to do to clarify and move that project forward. We're working on the RFP language, which hopefully it will go live as soon as the environmental assessment is cleared, barring anything really tragic happening there. The RFPs for our rooftop solar, we've selected 2 vendors, and we're working through contracting with them at the moment, where we'll do final site design, final site design, because we had some beautiful, friendly internal competition where people started saying, oh, you're going to do carports? I want to do carports. And so we sort of expanded more solar than what we started with, which I'm personally very excited about. I'm sure you are too. So we'll get to final design, and then we'll go to build, which is great. Met with the Housing Commission today on their RFP for solar projects, and similar initiative. We're adding 3 more sites in. So it's just growing, which is really, really exciting to see that momentum take place. We have 4 EV chargers that are sitting in Ann Arbor in a parking spot in our garage. They're fast chargers. Super excited to get them in the ground. We're just waiting on our electrician to have a little break in their schedule to come out, and we'll do the trenching, and then those will be up, which is great. We have placed our order for our first electric refuse truck, and we are working on the second round of funding with the state, looking at other vehicles. We are in discussions with Madison, Wisconsin, which has got the first electric fire truck, and we're understanding how that's operating and thinking about that as one of the things we'll be applying for next for funding to cover the Delta for. Chief Kennedy is excited and slightly nervous, but very, very fun stuff happening there. And I'm sure I'm forgetting billions of things, but you heard about benchmarking, time of marketing, or the home energy disclosure ordinance is coming shortly, the green rental task force. We've had initial hearing kind of discussion with some tenants, doing the same thing with some landlords, and then we'll bring them together to talk about what we can do in the rental landscape. Very exciting stuff. So,
Missy, could you please on the millage, and if and when the commission might be able to possibly take a stand or a position on support of the millage, or and so on and so forth. What can you inform us about that? It was obviously the article in MLive. It was covered briefly in the last council meeting. Anything you or either council members can update us on in that regard?
Sure, and that just shows how distracted we are with work that I completely and totally forgot to mention the millage. So thank you very much. Yes, so a proposal has been brought forward to look at a millage to fund climate action, and that is something the mayor is working through the use resolution. My understanding is it'll be presented both, if it's decided to move forward, it'll be presented both as the proposed ballot language and then an intention of use resolution that outlines specifically what the resources would be allocated towards. I highly anticipate it will be 2.0 initiatives, very focused on things like getting toward the circular economy and really investing in our zero waste initiatives, which includes local job creation, because we don't really have all the local markets that we need in that landscape. Very much centering kind of equity and local trades in this work. And I mean both of those things in both of those ways, thinking about how we correct where we don't have services and programs and where we enhance things that are working, like our Aging in Place Efficiently program and scaling that. So we're sort of waiting on the final use resolution. That'll be the direction for where we head. And as soon as we get that, we will share. And then I imagine we would come back to the commission for consideration of support or non-support of that effort.
Any questions of Missy before we open it up to other commissioners?
I just have a quick question. Did you say that the 3 new appointments are on this Monday's agenda, or for the city council?
I had a hard time finding them, but I was told by the clerk's office that they were on for first read the last meeting and they're up for second read this meeting.
That is correct. I saw them on there. They are separated out because one of them requires a higher vote threshold.
Thank you.
Carlene, did I see your hand?
Yes, I'd like a little bit more information about this, the solar installations. You said there's a couple that are being added for the city, or this is at the beginning of your update? You're telling
Yeah, I actually know which one you're talking about. So there's 2 sort of additions that are happening. One, we put the RFP out for 13 facilities. We are now at 16 facilities that are just City of Ann Arbor. And we put it out mostly thinking it would be rooftop solar, but it's expanded to also being ground mount and carports at a number of sites, not all sites. EV charging is a part of many of them as well, as we're working through kind of thinking about this. And we're not in final design yet. That's kind of where we're heading once we get the contract signed, which is really great. It's an opportunity I'll use the example of the farmers market where we have modest demand, but we have more roof space. So we can't over-generate, but if we put EV chargers in, which we know we want, now we can maximize. So how do we, that's the kind of customization we're trying to do.
Missy, is storage involved in this at all?
We have it. So that's something we'll be working with the different installers. Each site's a little bit different in terms of what we're looking for. We are asking for each site to be storage ready. So all the electrical is done. I do anticipate at some point we will do storage at all the sites. You could imagine something like the water treatment plant. Storage is key because we're peak shaving, right? Like that's really what we're going to be doing there to make that a viable initiative versus something like Argo Cascades, where the demand profile is like all summery. And so storage is perhaps later add-on. So we're trying to really customize for the different sites.
Where are the carports being considered?
Arlene, I can't even do that on the spot. I know for sure the senior center is one, and then we looked at a number of the different park sites, but I'm happy to give an update as soon as we have it on the final designs. We have preliminary designs. We have to now do the work to get to the final design phase.
Thank you.
Updates from other commissioners and from City Council as well. Seeing none, I think the next thing on the agenda is committee updates. Any committee updates? Carlene, can you amend just very briefly what's going on? I think we have a meeting from Transportation Electrification. We had a little bit of a pause, and I think we have a meeting scheduled for the 20th, but that's really probably just about it, right?
That's it.
Yep. And maybe I can comment real quickly. Last night, a group of us met on concierge services, and we shared our feedback garnered through interviews with a number of other entities, municipal entities that have similar programs, Vancouver, Boulder, Bay Area. They have 9 counties that have all joined together. I'm blanking on a couple others. There were roughly a half a dozen. We raised another number of questions. We've put together an outline of some issues to be resolved. We sort of have a target of having a clear sort of action plan and timetable in the September or so timeframe. So we're starting to make some movement there. It took a couple of or several weeks to get all those interviews in, but I think we're looking forward to getting that off the ground and being able to engage with residents and actually say, you know, you're interested in A20, now we can help you realize your project and give you good advice. So that's moving forward. Any other reports from any other subgroups or anyone else? Anything come to mind? If not, then I think we go to public comment. So I think I need to read my spiel again. Where's my spiel? Just a second, sorry. Here we are. So this is an opportunity for a person to speak up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, or if you're just listening in, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247. That's 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247, and enter the meeting ID 913-5783-4502. This information is also displayed in the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand, to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone, and you will hear an automatic announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area, mute any television or background noise so that we may hear you clearly. And then finally, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Speaker ending in 228.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Greg Woodring. I am a member of Ann Arbor for Public Power, and I'm calling in to express my gratitude for hearing out this presentation and for considering this idea, though I am concerned about the speed with which it is being discussed to vote on this resolution. As Roshan, I believe, did an excellent job laying out, and Ember also repeated, this resolution is not asking anybody to commit to the idea of municipalizing right away. It's simply asking that we do our due diligence in investigating whether this is the right option. As Chuck Hookham, Commissioner Hookham pointed out, it seems that we've got a pretty clear answer on whether it's legal. It is. It's absolutely a legal path forward, and while certainly DTE would put up a fight against it, they would not have solid grounds to fight on. It's something that we could win, and it's something that would be a major benefit to the rest of the state in terms of providing a pathway forward on how to get out from under the grip of DTE. We've had plenty of time to see the benefits of municipalization. It's a major cash cow for the city. It reduces people's rates. It's far more reliable, an issue that we saw just tonight with CTN going out due to a power outage. These things are only going to get more severe. We just saw some of the worst flooding that I've seen probably ever in my lifetime. And these natural disasters are just ramping up. Climate change is here. We can't afford to wait any longer. We need to start taking action. And so I really hope that the council will move forward with speed on considering these questions, because, this is just one step along the way. We can't get bogged down debating the entire question before we get the data in front of us. I certainly do encourage the commission to talk to these other cities that have tried it. Winter Park, Boulder, Pueblo, Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado also have excellent munis. There's plenty of great munis in the state. Holland, Lansing, Traverse City, you just heard from Chris Bisdock, former mayor there. There's plenty of good information to go around, but all of that information is not going to be directly applicable to Ann Arbor. A feasibility study will. So if we're really going to make an informed decision on what would be the right path forward, we're going to need those numbers. And I think that it would be the wrong perspective to take to think that by recommending that the city council go forward with this feasibility study, that you are advocating for a path forward. Nobody is saying that you should advocate for a path forward before you have the data in front of you. But I really hope that you'll move forward to investigate this and get that data in front of you so that we can all, as a city, make the best decision for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have anyone else missing?
Yeah, caller ending in 920.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi there. My name is Sam Limerick. I am a resident of Ward 3. I am also a member of the Climate Action Movement at UM, which is a member of Ann Arbor for Public Power. A lot of what I have to say echoes what Greg just said, but I'll go forward. I do recognize that council has raised a lot of questions about how municipalization would look like, both how we do it and how it operates in Ann Arbor, both today as well as in all the past meetings that we've been having this discourse. And yeah, there are certainly many unknowns and a lot of outstanding questions, as we've seen in our presentations. However, there is only one clear path forward to really understanding what the path forward looks like. And again, this resolution is not about directing the city's path. It's ensuring that we can see the paths that we have before us. And this is too big of an issue and too concerning of a crisis to not fully consider all these paths. I mean, like a couple of the callers, both at the beginning and just there with Greg, I'm alarmed at some of the recent climate extremes we've seen, including what we seem to be increasingly common and widespread reports of emergency asks by utilities to their customers to significantly curtail their energy use in order to preserve just the basic integrity of the grid. And as we rise to confront this, generational and, dare I say, existential challenge and look to grow Ann Arbor's resilience to the crises of the future, we really just can't leave any options on the table. I'd like to see the Energy Commission adopted bias for action as it relates to voting on this proposed resolution. Like Greg, I think that we're moving a little bit too slow. October may be too late. We can talk all we want about what may have gone wrong in Boulder or any other place, but yeah, like Greg said, these are completely distinct legal landscapes, and it's clear now that here in Ann Arbor we won't necessarily face those same barriers. Although yes, of course, UT will fight us. And yes, my final point really is just to reiterate the point that A2P2's ask of this commission is really quite narrow. We are certainly not asking this commission to support municipalization. This is a big issue, but we are asking the commission to take the first logical step in evaluating the most realistic option to achieve the first 820 goal. That is an electrical grid powered by 100% renewable sources. We know that isn't going to happen with DT and their timelines. 120K, the estimated cost we kind of quoted in the presentation is less than $1 per resident of Ann Arbor. It seems like a no-brainer to make that investment, to find out all the details we need to know to do that due diligence. And after hearing the legal portion of today's presentation, can we afford not to further investigate this route and potentially secure new tremendous revenue streams for the city? Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you for your comments.
Caller ending in 99. Hold on, sorry. Caller ending in 661. Sorry.
Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Gus Teschke. I live at 313 Montgomery in Ann Arbor. I'm part of Ann Arbor Indivisible. We had a chance to look at this resolution recently, and we voted to endorse it. We're not really sure about munis at this point, but we definitely want a feasibility study. What we know about them is very good. They look like an excellent alternative, and we urge the Energy Commission to approve this resolution, move this along, and get the information. Let's see. We were impressed by not only the zero carbon and the control of that energy, but it's cheaper and more reliable and separate from DTE. And most of all, there's a clear path. Listening to the lawyer, I thought was very instructive. And I got to believe that the city will like a revenue stream. These are all very powerful reasons to do this. The alternatives don't seem as compelling to us. All right. So we hope you will approve the resolution. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for calling. Anyone else, Missy?
Yeah, caller ending in 998.
Hi, can you hear me?
We do.
Terrific. Hello, everybody. My name is Zachariah Ferrum, and I'm the student body vice president for the College of LS&A at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And I'm calling tonight to speak in favor of this resolution, to speak in favor of a feasibility study. I was trying to log on earlier today to see the entirety of this meeting, but unfortunately I was having problems because I had a power outage at my home, and I lost internet. And I noticed that once I walked across campus to try to watch the meeting, it looks like the CTN network completely failed because of a DTE power outage. I think that really stresses the importance of exploring this option in its entirety. Now, in LSA student government, we discussed the possibility of municipalization, and we discussed a resolution which we passed overwhelmingly in support of municipalization and in support of replacing DTE's corporate-backed dirty electricity with public power. And so we passed that, as I said, overwhelmingly, and we urged the energy commissioners and the city council to explore this option completely and answer the questions that we all have about public power. And the way that we do that is to fund a feasibility study. So I really hope that you will take steps forward, concrete steps, to fund this feasibility study. Like was said many times, we are running on a very short timetable here. Young people like me really live in a constant state of crisis
with a constant feeling of dread, because we know that the smartest people in our society are telling us we need to have ambitious, bold action to defeat climate change, to ensure that we, as young people, have a future, not necessarily just a better future, but a future, period. So I very much urge you, in the strongest words I can use, to please fund this feasibility study, to explore this option in its entirety. Because while the A to Zero plan was a bright glimmer of hope for young people like me, a young Ann Arborite like me, I was extremely concerned that we have one plan to eliminate a large percentage of our emissions and no backup plan. That is CCA. Now, CCA sounds terrific, but if we don't have a backup plan and CCA doesn't pass, young people like me are really screwed, excuse my language, but we don't have anything to do. You know, the A to Zero plan will fail. And nobody wants that. Least of all, a young student like myself. And the last thing I'd like to say is that as a student here in Ann Arbor, reliability is extremely important. And like I said, I've had multiple power outages, not only just today, but throughout the past 2 semesters. And as a student, I really need to have reliable internet. And unfortunately, at extremely important times throughout my education, I've had power outages which have impacted my education. I wasn't able to log on to class, and at times, actually, at one point, that lasted for 3 days during a school week. So I couldn't have any access to my classes that I'm paying tens of thousands of dollars for.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is up.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your passion. Missy, anyone else?
We don't, Chair Murski. I just wanted to take this opportunity just to kind of name that the statement that we don't have a backup to CCA is false. And so I look forward to hopefully having follow-up conversations about that, because we've heard that a few times, which is not a true narrative.
Great. Okay, so the last point on the agenda is agenda items for our next meeting. And first of all, Missy, maybe if I don't have it in front of me, but I know you don't have it either in front of you. What's up is it's likely to be the home energy audit disclosure resolution or ordinance, and a consideration of a resolution on that, correct? I think we're going to try to get Charlotte back to do a presentation on the energy, the state energy code. Carlene or Missy, do you remember what else is up for our next meeting? I might have it here, just a second. Let's see.
Is there any news, John, whether we'll meet in person or not? Is that a possibility?
End of the year, Missy, I understood, correct?
Yeah, we're staying remote for the future. And then I think we're waiting to hear what makes sense for folks. The one thing that is absolutely certain is we can't do a split. We don't have the tech. I mean, we're going to do it for council, but we won't be able to do some in person, some not. So we'll have to decide, I think, as a body at some point, how we want to proceed.
I think obviously the Delta variant and students coming back to town and everything probably will weigh in on how we go forward. But obviously that'll be something that council probably decides.
Just a question.
Go ahead, Robert.
No, sorry, John. Just before you move on that, I was just curious, is that directive going to come from us, or is that something this body makes as a decision as a whole, or is this going to come from council? Just to be clear.
Good question. And our council members, I'm not sure if council is going to do this. I think it might be an administrative decision, or unless council wants to weigh in on it.
I did not see necessarily the directive from the city. One of my commissions did have a debate on whether or not they wanted to return to in-person at this point, which made me think that there may have been some indication from staff that they could. They chose not to. we are following the county's emergency order, which will allow us to continue meeting remotely through the end of the calendar year. The indication I have had from county colleagues is that they do not intend to rescind that, so that folks have that flexibility. It is likely that council may return before commissions even. I know that there's also been some discussion of allowing for increased flexibility for commissions in perpetuity because there's been some evidence suggesting that we've had higher participation rates and more presence of quorum and things like that as folks have been able to join from wherever they are. So I know that those are all factors in the decision at this point.
Thank you. Any suggestions for our next meeting? You're not tied to what you say tonight. You're certainly welcome to make proposals, and we had a number of comments tonight about this issue about municipalization and timing of a second reading and a vote on that. So we'll talk about that as well. Anything else that anybody wants to offer up at this time?
I just wanted to clarify, our next meeting is August, and we are having an August meeting. I think at the last meeting we said we were going to discuss that at this meeting.
I think you're right. And I do remember we had a meeting, Carlene and I and Missy, about all the potential topics, and we had certainly enough material. I know a few commissioners have indicated potentially or a likelihood that they won't be able to participate. Actually, there's a chance I may not either. So I don't know, how do people feel about meeting in August? Do you want to leave it up to us, or do people have strong feelings one way or another? It's currently listed in Legistar.
I would state that I have a little bit of a challenge. I will do my best to be there.
Commissioner McCoy, yes.
Yeah, I know I'm not going to be there as well. So I think just depending on how many people we know are going to be there, and especially whether or not, if the new commissioners are not going to be on board, it'd be good to know in advance. It sounds like we might not even have quorum if 3 people might have challenges being there.
Commissioner York.
Amber, Commissioner McCoy just raised a very good point. I would be, that I didn't even think about until just now, I would be very much in favor of canceling the August meeting and just doing it in September, considering tentatively the second reading of the resolution would be coming up. And that would be a lot for new people to take on without a proper onboarding process. And I know that, just from my experience with commissions and so forth, I don't know what experience these people will have coming into the commission, but, to really make sure that there's time for a sit down, if like in person, if possible, or, virtual for sure, but discussion about all the different things and, what's currently on the agenda, what to expect. I think that should take precedence, because considering there's 3 of them, that's a huge addition to the commission.
That's true. And we do onboarding. We started doing that a year ago. I think it was a year ago. Yeah, a year ago. And we would plan on doing that, obviously, or most likely that would take place using some type of virtual meeting. But yeah, we definitely plan on doing that once those new commissioners are on board. And you're right, there are some important things. What do people feel about sending out something like a poll, whether it's a doodle poll or whatever, and just having everybody check their schedules and indicating whether or not they're likely to be there? I can do that, the next day or two, and if we get people to respond, we'll even get a sense of whether we're going to have a quorum or not. Does that make sense?
John, it doesn't sound like we're voting on anything. How about turning it into a workshop that's kind of voluntary?
And I did find the proposed agenda, and we don't have anything pressing, minus the first potential read of the head ordinance, but we could circulate that for commissioners to review in advance for sure. Sounds like people deserve a summer break.
How about Missy, maybe you, Carleen, and I have a discussion. We typically do that a week before the meeting. How about if we do it in the next couple of days and make a decision, and we'll either send out a notice one way, or we will send out a notice one way or another that would either be, no, we're not going to do this, or we would like to have a poll to be able to make a final decision, but we will get something out soon. Does that sit well with everybody? Good. Okay. Good. Any other? Yes, please.
There was one last logistics thing that, thank you, Carleen, for naming this via email. We will need to do an election for chair and vice chair for our officers. So when we do convene the next time, be prepared to nominate someone else, but be ready. That will be on our agenda.
Right. So chair, vice chair, and liaison to the environmental commission. Those are the three positions that we'll vote on. Okay, great. Anything else? Anybody? Going once, going twice. Meeting is adjourned. 8:37 p.m. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks. Good night.
Hopefully
Thank
it's
you.
a dry evening.